Hi, I'm Jim McCairns, and today is Friday, June 29th, 2012, and I'm interviewing Rich Frank for the Archive of American Television here in Beverly Hills.
I feel about 3 hours I'll be laying on the floor, you'll be walking around, and it'll be...
You know, it goes really fast.
What was your name at birth?
My name at birth was Richard Frank, same as it is now.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn in 1942.
And what is your father's name and what did he do?
My father's name is Hy Frank, Hyman. He was a wholesale meat packer in Brooklyn, a job he got into after the war. He's actually still living out here in Brentwood. We moved him out. He's 95 years old, soon to be 96, and one of the guys who was on the ships landing in Normandy. So he's been around, and he has a lot of stories to tell, too.
What is your mother's name, and what did she do?
My mother's name is Edith Frank. She just recently passed away. She was what you define as the typical American mother and housewife. She raised family. She originally worked at Macy's at $5 an hour when my dad had met her.
In New York?
In Brooklyn also.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have a brother named Bill Frank, who was retired now. He was president of the Chris Craft stations and ran Channel 13 here in Los Angeles. And he's retired and living here in L.A.
Growing up, what activities interested you back in Brooklyn?
We were a big sports family. I was not particularly great at sports, but I played all the sports, and school was always big in that. I always followed that. My dad, before he had gone to the Army, was a big-time baseball player, so we were always very tied to that. He still sits at home in Brentwood and watches all the games on television.
Was he a league player?
He was going to play third base for Montreal, which is now the Dodger Farm. What was the Dodger Farm team back then, but when he went to war, when he came back, as he said, 4 years away, and you can't hit a fastball. So he came back and didn't do that. Went into the wholesale meatpacking business. I was a television watcher, get screamed at by my mother from day one. I would sit this close to the TV set and after school and eat potato chips and drink Coca-Cola and never do my homework, but watch television all the time and always got in trouble for it.
What were some of your favorite shows?
Oh, I remember Cisco Kid and Captain Video and Kukla, Fran and Ollie and boy, I'm going to think about more. The Lone Ranger. It was just an interesting time. It just took up my time. My mother always used to say to my teachers when she got called in, because I had a loud mouth in class, that he's going to write comedies one day because he can't stop saying all that. Now, I never developed that skill, but I think I have that sense of appreciation of it from those days.
Do you think TV influenced you that way?
Absolutely. I didn't know it at the time, but absolutely.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
You know, I never thought about it. That's a good question. I always knew, originally, I went to school to study architecture and like mechanical drawing and that type of thing, but never gave a lot of thought to actually working. So I guess I went through a life of never thinking I was going to grow up.
What college did you attend, and what did you study?
I went to the University of Illinois, and the school I got into there was the architecture school, and my dad had said that I could go any place I wanted to go to school, except any place I could come home for the weekend.
That's how you ended up in Illinois.
Well, I had actually never been that far west from New York at the time, but he had saved up his money. Nobody in our family had ever gone to college. And he said to me, when I asked him then, is that because you don't love me? He said, no, I think college is at least half about learning how the world operates and the people you meet, and that it's different all the way in Illinois than it is in Brooklyn. And I think that's what you'll learn and you'll understand, and it'll make it different for you. And boy, was he right. And now, I wasn't very good at that.
The architecture part.
Yeah, it was two things that were going on. Vietnam was just starting up. Illinois was a land grant school at the time, so you had to be in one of the services. I was in the Air Force. I chose that because I didn't have to carry a rifle during drills. And so it was a different time, but I thought I was pretty good mechanical drawing. Of course, the first class that they brought us to with all our green box of all of our charcoals and everything, and they set up, your easel to draw, and they brought out some beautiful co-ed model who took off her clothes, and they said, sketch. And I was sort of more interested to finding out what dorm she was in. And realized also then I wasn't very good at sketching. I was good on mechanical drawing. Anyway, so I didn't stay in that too long. I moved over to engineering because both of those did not require a language. I was trying to avoid a language. And I didn't do very well there either. And then I almost got thrown out with my grades, but I stayed in and switched into the business school, where I finally found what I was good at, and I majored in marketing and minored in journalism and graduated with pretty good grades. And later on, they even asked me to come back and give the commencement address and be one of their honored students with a picture in the Illini Union, a place of which when I was there, I made fun of everybody whose picture was on the wall. So things come full circle sometimes, and you end up finding out where you should be and what you do.
You ended up going into advertising out of college. How did that come about?
Well, like I said, I graduated with a degree in marketing, well, what did you want to do? You wanted to go to a Madison Avenue advertising agency. I'd been offered a job by IBM to go work with them, but when I was told I had to wear a hat and a white shirt during the day, it just didn't quite fit. I ended up getting an interview at BBDO in New York.
That's an advertising agency.
That was, it was the fourth largest at the time. There wasn't these conglomerates then. In fact, Mad Men, which is on now, is exactly the story of my life when I was there. It was exactly at that time.
In terms of gender politics and the way everybody...
Politics, drinking, the way people were treated. I laughed when I saw the first pilot episode where they were trying to get the account from what the time was ANS's, and they had to search around to bring up a Jewish guy, which they found in the accounting department, I think, because there wasn't one in the room and there wasn't another one at the agency and all that. And that's what it was like at the time. It was there. It was wingtip shoes and jackets and ties, and if you didn't show up that way, you got sent home. But it was a martini at lunch or two, and just that whole world. And I watched it from the media department level. $95 a week job, and you hoped to get overtime so you could afford to live.
What was your title?
I think I was an assistant media planner. and then a media buyer and that. But it was a great experience. You got to understand media and how people react to campaigns and when you should do things. And it's funny now you mention. I remember the first time I had to do a campaign for Xerox antifreeze, and you had to realize that you had to buy, and you had to be checking the temperatures when you should buy, and buying locally, and what you were doing for all of that, and it was sort of funny. The other one that was funny was Bromo Seltzer, because Bromo Seltzer, as opposed to Alka-Seltzer, was actually habit forming. And so the whole idea, they never spoke about this outside, was that you get as many people to try it as possible, because then they would probably use it again. But it was still the days of cigarette advertising, and beer advertising was just starting, and it was a little different, but it was a great way to learn about ratings and local market differences and all of that.
What we see on the air in Mad Men is pretty much day to day what happened with you.
I have actually called them and told them I have a few other stories I could tell them. But yes, I'm not talking about the particular stories that they're fictionalizing, but the time and place and concept are right on the money. They are really accurate.
Did you enjoy it at the time, or were you aware of the pressure?
I loved it. I've loved every job I've had. And I've never looked for the next one. We just sort of came along. And each one has led to the next one. And I can't think of a better first job than that, being around and being at a big, get to go to Madison Avenue and 47th Street and go into an office. It was a cubicle. It was near the bathroom to start with, but
and you're in your early 20s?
Great. Yes, it was my first job out of school. I was probably 21 years old around the time.
By the way, did Mad Men ever get back to you about wanting to hear some of those other stories?
I bump into them all the time because they're always getting awards, and I'm always congratulating them. So it was not so much I was looking to do that. It was more of a compliment to them that, I so appreciated what they were doing.
Why did you end up leaving BBDO?
Well, like I said, I was making $95 a week and buying advertising time, and all the people coming in to me were selling advertising time, and they were dressed in really nice suits, and they always had an expense account to take us out, and they had tickets to the Knicks and the Rangers. And I realized that they made a lot more money than we made. So I got an offer of a job at a company called Petrie, which was one of the big national representation firms. They sold advertising for TV stations to the agencies for $10,000 a year. And I said, that's it. It's not going to get any better than this. And moved over to work there.
And that was in New York?
It was in New York also.
What eventually brought you out to Los Angeles?
Well, from there I stayed with Petrie for a while, and then a number of us broke away from there and started a new rep firm called Telerep, which is one of the big ones today. I went to Chicago at the time to run the Chicago office. Ended up moving back to New York at the Telerep office in New York, and was representing, they were owned partially by Chris Kraft, and which is Channel 13 here in LA. And I was representing them and got an offer from KTLA Channel 5 here, which is owned by Gene Autry at the time, to join them as the national sales manager, which was a step up. And I was able to still live in New York and just travel to the station. And so I went and I moved out to Los Angeles as the sales manager of Channel 5.
What was it like to work there at that time? And what was your title?
A national sales manager. Eventually I became general sales manager, but it was great. It was it was the days of the independents, and they didn't do very well, but nobody really cared. There were 3 network stations. The independents was scrambling around for bits and pieces and
of programming.
Yes, and making most of their money off of Saturday morning used car sponsored movies and a lot of religious programming on Saturday and Sunday morning. And, Channel 9 ran one movie all week long called The $1 Million Movie. They said the same movie they ran over and over again. And very little news on these stations. It was just a matter of reruns and doing that and finding things that were interesting. We happened to have a number of the sports teams on the stations, which made it a little more interesting. And that's where I got involved with the Angels because Gene Autry owned them at the time. And we would, it was everything from taking the sponsors all down to Palm Springs for weekend boondoggles so that they would sponsor the teams and all that. But it was another great way to learn another part of the country, and it was enjoyable. It was good.
You eventually ended up at KCOP.
Well, that's where I got called back by, like I said, Chris Kraft owned the rep firm I was at, and I knew them. And I was now working at KTLA, and they called me back a few years later to say, would you come in and actually be the general manager of KCOP and some other stations that they owned, Portland, Minneapolis. And I did that. I was able to stay here in town, but now I got a bigger canvas to play with and more responsibility. And
did you feel prepared for that?
I've never felt prepared for any job I've had. Like I said, it's each one sort of comes where it is. I didn't feel unprepared, but I didn't really know what it is, and I found over time you make your own job descriptions in general. One of the things that I got very involved with there, which led to ultimately my career as it went on, was that I was tired of just running programs again that everybody had run before, and we started doing some original programming. I had George Putnam and Mort Saul on a show called Both Sides Now. Today it would be called any one of these cable shows. I mean, it was, Hannity and Combs. It was, a liberal and a conservative, and there was a topic each night, and they went at it. And they were difficult things. We were able to get at the time a copy of the Zapruder film on the Kennedy assassination, I'm just thinking. And
that had not aired before?
It hadn't aired, and we were putting it on. And we actually won a local Emmy in L.A. for it. But I remember we were so scared the night before that somebody was going to come in and take it and do all that we actually locked it in a vault and for the night and took it out the next day. And
is it a secret how you came into possession of it?
It's not a secret, except I don't remember. Somebody in the news department had gotten it, and we slowed it down and showed it frame by frame, and and everybody could make their own judgments and blew it up. I mean, today with digital, you'd be able to do so much, but we had film, and it was just really interesting. It was a time for me to open up. I really opened up my eyes to how important television could be, even if you were the smallest guy on the block. If you had a voice, and you could say something, and people would listen.
That was your vision for the station then, is to have it be more than just a repository of repeats, but something...
We wanted to step out a little bit. And one of the projects that we did, we were one of many independents around, and there were co-ownerships, and it was very difficult to put groups together because, New York owned WPIX in New York and not KTLA at the time, but Tribune had the two of them. And so if I was going to do something in LA, it was tough to hook up with the station in New York because then it was competitive. And, there was a lot of that puzzle solving to create groups, but we did around that time we wanted to do something bigger, not just small, and that's when we decided we would do a mini series. There was a lot of movies of the week back then, and we put together a group called Operation Prime Time, which was just a station in every market. Everybody contributed sort of in proportion to what size they were, to do a mini-series. I remember the first one was called Testimony of Two Men. And we had to go somebody to produce it for us, and we went around, and I was mostly involved because I was the guy that lived in L.A. for the group, so I wasn't more important than anybody in the group. I was just the guy who was here. So I went out to the studios, and I met with Sid Sheinberg at Universal at the time. And it was he and Lou Wasserman were running it. And we sat down at lunch, and I told them what we wanted to do and develop everything. And at that lunch, Sid said, "We'll do this one, and we'll do many more with you. We love the idea. We want to be your partner." And I was shocked, excited but shocked. And I actually walked out, and when I called everybody, I went, I don't know what just happened, but that was like, it was major, and it may have just been at the right time. It may have been what they were thinking also at the time, but it was pretty amazing to have a studio who was that big, and they were huge into movies of the week and all of that, support us. And I knew they couldn't make money on it, but we were also the stations that bought a lot of their off-network shows, so we were good partners for them. And we did a number of those over the years.
Miniseries.
Yeah, they were 2 hours, 4 hours. So we did A Woman Called Golda, and that was the first time that an original non-network show had won an Emmy. It was really interesting times. Things were just really getting going and looking for other places to go with things.
How many stations would be involved in Operation Primetime?
It was probably, I bet you we had close to 100. Some of them were network affiliates that just preempted their network on a given night. And there weren't too many of these. You had it now, and maybe 4 months later you had another one if we were going to do them right. And but it led to the speaking about and the talking about, could there be another network? Could there be another association? Were there enough individual stations to comprise another network? And it was hard to talk about it at the time because you got to remember there were no satellites. There was no way to deliver programming. Everything had to be through AT&T long lines, and there were very specific, the costs were gigantic just to deliver shows. And the union and guild arrangements were horrendous for independence. I mean, literally at the time, news was defined as ABC, NBC, and CBS News. There was not a definition of news. That was the definition of news, what they were doing. So it was just an interesting time. So much was changing at the time.
You've mentioned, let's go back, you mentioned
Sure.
Chris Kraft. Tell us what that is again.
Chris Kraft, aside from the boat maker that everybody knows, and it is them, Chris Kraft owned a group of television stations and ended up buying another group later on called United Television Stations. And they were one of the partners actually that started the CW, which is UPN before that. They were the U in the UPN with Paramount. And it was run by Herb Siegel and Larry Barnett, two ex-agents out of Universal, living in New York. And they just bought some television stations and wanted to build them out. And they were good. They were one of the first original groups, who started to form at the time. And you were already allowed to own at the time 5 television stations. So it was there was a limit on how much percentage of the market you could cover because the FCC was scared about monopolizing voices in each market.
And this was in the mid-'70s?
It was actually late 60s and early 70s. Yeah.
So in addition to minis and movies, some other programming came out of OPT, Operation Primetime?
Eventually it did. What I did at that time, that was about another change in my career. We were doing these miniseries, and I started to get nervous that Universal might not be there the next time we brought one, because I could see who was losing money and how it was going. So I set up a meeting at Paramount with the 2 new heads there, Barry Diller, who was there, and Michael Eisner, who had just gotten there. Both had come out of ABC, and they were running the studio. And I went over there to try to convince them that Paramount should do some of these miniseries. I was trying to hedge my bets so I would have 2 in case one stopped. And I gave him all the reasons he should because, a lot of our stations had purchased the year before Happy Days, and look at how valuable they were to Paramount and whatever. And Michael called me that afternoon afterwards and said, can we have lunch tomorrow? And I said, sure. I figured, boy, this was easy. And I met him for lunch the next day, and he said, I really hate your idea, but we want to look at starting a new network at Paramount, and I'd like you to come over here and run it. Which was a little shocking to me, because it was a side of the business that now it was the production side of the business, and I hadn't really done that except on a very light basis. And I ended up going back to Chris Craft. I had a contract which I couldn't leave, but I went back to Chris Craft, and they let me get out. And I went over to Paramount to start what was called then the Paramount Television Service. And some of these names will be interesting to you. When I was putting it together, I hired to run programming Jeffrey Katzenberg and moved him out to the West Coast. He had been in the promotion department, marketing of Paramount. I hired Ron Nelson to be our financial guy. He ended up being the CFO of DreamWorks for a while, and I haven't seen Ron in a while, but I'm not sure exactly what he's doing now. I hired Mel Harris, who ended up being head of Sony, to be head of research. And we just had a really neat group that went around. And we hired Randy Reese to be the head of sales. And almost all the people we hired there to be our salespeople ended up running the various companies in town over time. It was just a great group. And we went out and started clearing stations to run a full lineup of programs, which was going to start on a Saturday night. The first show at 8 was going to be starting Star Trek again. And then from 9 to 11, we were going to run a movie. And we were going to start the network on Saturday nights because it was a weeknight for most stations. And Star Trek had been not on the air for a while, and there had only been 79 of them done originally, and we thought we could really get an audience. And it ended up we cleared a lot of the United States, but around the time, it was when they took cigarette advertising off of television, and the advertising market collapsed on itself. And economically, it didn't make any sense. So we pulled back and announced we weren't going to do the network. That was when, at the same time, Gary Nardino, who was running the other part of television at Paramount, was leaving. Michael gave me the job to be the head of all of television at Paramount. Jeffrey Katzenberg moved over to work with Don Simpson on the movie side. That's sort of where that split came, and we started doing other things then. That's around the time that the network wasn't working. We started playing around with another show called Solid Gold, which was a show that we were going to do there and offered out to the same group of stations that we were starting to work with to see if we could do a first-run weekly music show.
And whose idea was that?
I guess it's like all things, a lot of people want to take credit for it. Al Massini, who was running Telerep, the rep firm I mentioned originally, and repping a number of these stations, was very active in programming ideas. And the heart of the group we had was he and the Taft Group, which was run at the time by Lucy Selhaney, and there are others that I'm just not thinking of right now. But the idea came out of a meeting we had. Whose it was, I'll give Al credit for saying we should do that. And then we followed up and put the show together, and it required us to figure out how to shoot weekly, shoot with a different shooting schedule than the Paramount Guild agreements would agree to, because it's really written for a movie company, and then still try to figure out how to distribute the show. And we did that, and Solid Gold was very successful, which led us to do the following year, Entertainment Tonight, which was the biggest gamble anybody had ever taken, and an unbelievable challenge in being the first show that would be done day and date and fed out to the country, because part of what we had to do was actually put satellite dishes into stations so that they could receive it.
Let's. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm running ahead of you, so go ahead.
No. It's perfect. I did have a question about Solid Gold, though.
Sure.
How did you come to select Dionne Warwick as a host, and why do you think the show worked as well as it did?
Dionne Warwick was a huge star. She was fantastic, and she could not only. She was a consummate professional singer. So while she had a series of hits and everybody knew her, she was also she was a backup singer. And so what we had to do was come up with a countdown show. Now, in the best circumstances, everybody who did the top 10 shows would come on your show that week and you wouldn't have to do anything else. So that's where we started. We said, we have a countdown show, and we're shooting it. Why wouldn't this band come on, or this singer? Well, you find out very rapidly that songs stay there week to week, so you don't necessarily want to have them every week. And these people do work all over the country and the world doing their performances. So we had to find something else. So the idea then started, well, why don't we have somebody sing the other songs, do a cover of the songs? That was a good idea. And who could do that? Well, Dionne Warwick should certainly walk in each week and sing something. But then, do you want to have 5 Dionne Warwick songs? So you don't want to do that. So maybe we can dance the numbers in between. And that's where we came up with the Solid Gold Dancers, which became probably more famous than the whole show. I mean, people love these dancers, and it was a little sexy at the time. And remember our lead dancer, Darcelle, the amount of requests that came in from pictures of her from prisons around America was staggering. And they always, of course, wanted a naked picture of her. And I remember we shot a poster one time from behind with her just sort of turning her head that we sent out all the time. But they all became popular. They all had their following. It was just an interesting time. So between the three, we were able to mix a show together. We also got smart enough that when a group came in and they had a number one song, we'd make sure we'd shoot their next release and put it on the side just in case, because we knew how it cycled. Eventually it would get there. We wouldn't have to get them back again, and we could just use it.
Did you have day-to-day or week-to-week involvement?
Every day at that, because it was sort of fun, and it was my first jump into to do that. Bob Banner worked with us. He was on that stuff, and Brad Lockman worked with us, and we sort of did it as we went along, because everybody had done specials, and certainly musical specials and musical shows was still on at the time, not like today where you can't find anything, or what you find is a concert performance, some behind-the-scenes shooting. So there were plenty of people around to do this. Matter of fact, I'm just thinking now, the first director we let do this was Lou Horvitz, who now has become one of the great directors doing the Academy Awards, the Emmys, the AFIs, and all this. But
he started on
Solid Gold was his first thing that he did, yeah. And he was great. So it was a fun time. It was just different. And for me, it was a way I started having my eyes open to production and doing different types of production, because I certainly didn't have a background in it.
Well, that does lead us to Entertainment Tonight. Why was the timing right? Was it just technologically that the timing was right for that show?
It was coming about. Also, my belief at the time was, they said there was only 3 networks. Who was the most popular in the morning was Rona Barrett. You know, everybody read Rex Reed's reports, and there were reviews, and people were interested. When I talked around, when I was listening, I came to the conclusion that people were more interested in how many shrimp there were at the Emmy Awards, or what the canopies were, or who was coming with who, or what somebody's dress cost. That was before the red carpet that you have now, than they were about best art direction in a comedy, you know, or, sad to say, even best writer on a drama. I mean, they cared about the actors and then everything else about entertainment. So if we could do a show that was a half-hour news show about what was happening in entertainment today, that would be great. Now, I didn't realize what it took to put that together.
For day and date.
For day and date. I'm just laughing to myself. I just said Entertainment Today. That was the original name of the show. We got sued by somebody who had a magazine called Entertainment Today that was given out in theaters, and we had to change the name to Entertainment Tonight. So something else I just thought about. Yeah, the problem was, at the time, a news crew from ABC could go out with a reporter, a cameraman, and a sound person at the time. That was it. Paramount's contract, because they were a movie studio, said they couldn't shoot anything without a lighting person, a sound person. You had to have a PA. It was like a huge group. Well, I couldn't compete with the networks who were out there. They could cover so much. So we went to the guilds and asked for waivers. It was a gigantic fight. And we just started going forward as if we were one of the networks. They threatened to close down Paramount. They didn't, and we eventually redid the agreements. But it was difficult. And then you had to get it all in. You had to edit the pieces. We shot it in the morning and wrapped it by noon because we had to feed it to the stations because a lot of the stations were running it at 4 o'clock before their news. We thought people should run it at 7:30. Of course, that's a great time period. But a lot of them ran it at different times. They were running it late night or early, but we had to get it there. I'm starting to think now about our first day. We wrapped our pilot the first day, not our pilot, our first show. We all went into the main newsroom and they had cake and everybody was having a good time. And the director came running down and said, my assistant mistimed it. We're 1 minute short. And we had to rush everybody back into the studio, reshoot the last segment, extending it a little bit. But the only station that was carrying us that didn't have a satellite feed was in Bakersfield. And we had a runner that would take the tape every day and drive to Bakersfield and give them that. So the first day, Bakersfield had a different show than everybody else because they had the 1 minute short show. I remember that. But we didn't want to look unprofessional, so we reshot that first episode. And it was fed out to...
I'm sorry, you hired and used a lot of local news producers and a local news crew because it was a day-to-day.
We picked up where we could. You know, we tried to get. We had our own couple of crews that went out, but nobody even knew who we were. So just hearing about the stories, you know, we picked them up anyplace, and it was not like today where I get 4 blogs with true stories and rumors every 20 minutes comes in, you know, back then. It wasn't, and we would watch all the shows, you know, and we were always upset. You know, Rona Barrett always scooped us because people called ABC, or, you know, then we hired Army Archer for a while because he had in with the people around, and slowly people found we were around. I mean, at the beginning, the first week we were doing this was the week that the 2 guys on Starsky and Hutch went on strike for. Holding out for money on at Warner. And we wanted to cover the story. Warner didn't want to cover the story, so they wouldn't even let us anyplace near the studio. I remember our guys holding a camera up trying to shoot over the fence. It's funny how things change. 6 months later, their PR department was calling us all the time to see if we could do stories. But at the beginning, nobody knew who we were. And if we were going to be, you know, TMZ type, or we were going to be what Entertainment Tonight is, and there's a difference, and it's a difference in working with the studios on that. But eventually, we got everybody's comfort level there.
Talk about working with the first producer, Andy Friendly. What were his contributions?
Andy was great. His dad, you know, was one of the classics of the news business. So he grew up in that world.
And his name?
Fred Friendly. And Andy was young, aggressive, a good writer, and interested in breaking as much ground as he could. And he was fun to work with. You had to pull him back, you had to push him out, but that's, you know, half of being a studio executive. And now I found out of being an executive producer over time is sort of being the daddy to the group. And so you're the one who has to say yes and no and whatever. But Andy did a great job and got us going. And we had our daily fights. You know, Barry Diller wanted the show to be much more esoteric. He wanted it to be more like CBS Sunday Morning. You know, you'd have a 6-minute piece. We'd also cover the opera. We would worry about theater. And as opposed to nowadays, or, you know, now all they talk about is story count, you know, and we realized, you know, eventually people wanted to see short things. And while you could do once in a while something a little longer, it was the short pieces that got people. our big get the first week was. Oh, this is great. I'm going to blank this.
We could think about it and come back
We
to
could
it.
think about it. I'm going to tell you now. Boogie Nights. Star.
Burt Reynolds?
Burt Reynolds. Thank you. We got Burt Reynolds to do a long piece for us, and we shot it and cut it into 5 parts. And that was our big thing the first week that Entertainment Tonight was on. And
A 5-part interview with Burt Reynolds.
yeah, we did it all at once, and we just used it to promote the whole week, and it was great. But over time, we just found that it was the shorter pieces. This is why now you see them all going, whose birthday, and as many names and shots and stuff you can get.
All rapid fire.
People really want that. And you want to also be able to have the first preview on a movie. You want to give, show clips of something. You want to see the behind the scenes and all that. But what you find out, and I think where they've all gone to is, move it. Now, again, the show's been around 30 years or so they've settled in, and there's probably 6 spin-offs of it, but we didn't know if it would work, and it did. And I think it changed television for 2 things. It said that news wasn't just international and national news and some local news. There actually was a news about an industry. It said that other people could be defined as news, not just ABC, NBC, and CBS. And it showed that other people could compete in that arena. And then by putting satellite dishes in the stations, when we weren't feeding them something, they had the ability to take in a feed on something else, and they were able to now be, without all the cost, able to buy programming that they liked because on a day and date basis because they could get it. And that's to me where I think the show's great and it's lasted all these years, but that was the technical breakthrough that show forced to happen in the country.
How did you come to hire Mary Hart in 1982 as the host?
She wasn't the first one. We had
Dixie Watley.
We had Marjorie...
Gross, maybe?
No, she was a Miss USA. She came from Marjorie Wallace from San Diego. Ron Hendren. We interviewed, we looked, we saw who wanted to do it, and like all shows, they change, we're seeing today. So Ann Curry's popular last week, she's out this week, it changes all the time, and it wasn't quite working, and we were getting feedback from the stations, and we found Mary, and she was just perfect. She was perky and smart and looked great on the air, and when we asked her to go out and do an interview, she was there and willing to work, and she was just great. And she became, obviously, the face of the show and just so synonymous with it. And she was there forever, but she was great.
Now, out of this period, you came to Paramount Television. Right. How did you end up becoming president of the Paramount Television Group?
Well, like I said, at the time, when we shut down the Paramount Television service, it just wasn't going to go. Michael asked me to take over the television division. Now, the television division at the time, you have to understand, was 2 things. It was network shows, and then it was the start of these non-network shows, Entertainment Tonight, Solid Gold, various other shows we were doing. And that was really it. Video was just starting. And we were the ones, our division, because we called it the syndication division. They sold our programs to all the shows, our programs to all the stations around the country. So we were also the ones that would sell the movies when they were out of the theaters to the stations. Pay TV was just starting then. We would sell movie packages to stations. So now video was coming online, as was pay television. So now it was a matter of you could sell a movie to Showtime or HBO, which were the two at the time, or you could put it out on video. I actually remember a giant discussion about what do we call this? And at the meeting, we decided to call it video, and it sort of stuck. And I don't know who came up with the name, but then it became home video. But it was not television, but it wasn't tape distribution. Anyway, it ended up being called video. And so now it fell to us to figure the sequential distribution patterns of the movies, because they would come out of the theater. How long would it work before it would go on pay television? How long would it go before it would go into video? Should video come before that? Then when does it go to the television station? And it was our job to stack it up and figure out the amount of time. And so now what was just television production became a group. So it just sort of morphed into the Paramount Television Group because we were just doing more and more.
It works.
Yeah.
Talk about your relationship with Eisner. What was your professional and personal relationship like?
It was great. I started with Michael. Like I said, he hired me out of the blue. He gave me the break to get into that side of the business. We worked together. We were 9 years there at Paramount and 10 years then at Disney. A long time. And he was just always supportive. He loved to be involved. He always had more to do, but he loved to be involved in reading scripts and giving his comments and doing all that. He didn't have as much time probably as he would have liked. So, I sort of learned it on the job. My probably worst courses in high school and college were anything about English and reading, and I didn't know a scene from an act, and I didn't know about character arcs, and I didn't know about all of the lingo that you use today. I realized I had good taste, and I knew what I liked, and I knew what I didn't like, and I knew what I could add to. And just learned it as it went along. I learned why something worked and why something didn't. And matter of fact, one of the great stories I tell was when I first took over at Paramount on the network side, we were doing Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, et cetera. And so I went down for my first table read. I had never gone there, and they were reading Happy Days. Show had been on the air for a number of years already. And they were all very, deferential. Here's your seat, Mr. Frank, and, welcome. And Gary Marshall was running running the show and running the whole operation, and I didn't even know how it worked. I was sort of watching everybody at the table, and they handed me a script, and I watched, when the people read their parts, everybody else wrote notes, and I went, oh, this is going to be interesting. So it got done, and Gary said, all right, the actors will take a break. They'll go get their wardrobe and this and that, and just want the writers to stay, and Rich stay. And so I stayed around the table, and he said, all right, Rich, what are your notes on the script? And I said, well, I didn't think I'd have to go first. And he said, well, just give us your notes. And I said, all right, I didn't think the joke on page 6 was really very funny. And he said to the group, and now we're going to sit here until Rich gives us a better joke. Meeting ended, and we went away, and he came over to me, and he said, I'm sorry I did that. That was not good. He said, but please understand, we know when there's not a good joke. That's not a good note to give to writers. And it changed everything I've done from that moment on about how I talk to writers, how I look at things. It's so easy to criticize. but if you don't have a suggestion or you don't frame it right, it's not the thing to do. And so Gary taught it to me at my very first meeting, and it's just lasted with me forever.
That's quite the lesson to learn.
Yeah, it
and
is.
An important one.
Yeah, it is. And Gary's still a friend, and I'm hoping to do another show with him soon.
And we assume he remembers that first
I
table meeting.
reminded him. I do remind him of it now and then. I think he's probably chosen to forget it, but for me, I remember
It's important.
it. Yes, exactly.
What about working with Barry Diller? What was that like?
Diller was a little different than Michael. They are very good friends, fabulous business associates, and totally opposite human beings. Barry is very serious about everything. Barry has a very private life and has, at the time, had not been married and have kids and other things that took him away from business all the time. It was always about business. He never stopped reading. He tended to gravitate towards, it's a bad word, but intellectual, smart ideas, not overly commercial in his thinking. Everything was analyzed, maybe quietly by himself, maybe with whoever he took counsel with, but always came back in different ways. The best example I could say is, he would do Reds and Michael would do Raiders of the Lost Ark. They just had a different... Now, together it merged and it was great. The meetings at the company with the two of them were... You could sell tickets to them. It always started out nice. Within 5 minutes, they were screaming at each other. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand. Why did you do this? On and on. Horrendous. You would think that they would never talk to each other again. The meeting would end, and a half an hour later you'd have another meeting, and it would just start from scratch again. And because the way they pushed each other's buttons, everything came out, and everything was fully fleshed, and you got to the bottom of things. And it was always done in a way that we were always better for it. So it was sort of an interesting way to watch a different type of management style. It worked. Barry never gave up the wish to start another network, which is when Charlie Bluhdorn died, and Barry left to go to Fox, which was going to start, he wanted to start the fourth network over there. And that's when Michael went through the whole issue with Paramount when he had been guaranteed the chairman job and it was given to Frank Mancuso. That's when that whole episode started, which was interesting, and it caused a split. But Barry, from the Paramount Television Service time, he never gave up the idea of the fourth network. And that's what carried over to one of the reasons when he went to Fox that got started. But they were just interesting. I think Barry's one of the smartest, most intelligent human beings I've ever seen. He's got an interesting personality, which when you get to know him, it's really good and fun to be around, but he can be abrasive to people at times just because he's just
That's his approach.
Very quick. I actually remember one time.
We're going to take for break. We're going to.
Yeah, let me tough.